Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. Today, we are wrapping up the entirety of Rhythm of War. Welcome to the last time we will be talking exclusively about Rhythm of War and only Rhythm of War. Paul, how are you?
Oh, fantastic! I'm so excited for this episode in particular, where we get to just zoom out, look at Rhythm of War as a whole, and kind of compare and contrast with our other books. Absolutely thrilled.
Elliot?
I am so Cosmere hyped right now. We just finished Rhythm of War, and then all three of us just got back like 2 days ago from Dragonsteel 2022, where we got constant 24/7. Well, it wasn't 7 days long, but 24 2 days long worth of
Yeah.
Cosmere exposure and excitement and theories, and it was pretty awesome. And I'm still on that high.
Fabulous, fabulous. This is the zoom out full book review, like you guys were saying. So we'll go through our ratings of the book, our general thoughts on how it went, a couple other finer points. We'll also be talking about what we knew at the end of Oathbringer and how our predictions went for Rhythm of War specifically. And then we'll be looking at Stormlight 5 for more predictions that we can put on record to get wrong later. So without further ado, let's talk about Rhythm of War. All right. Who would like to go first to rate the book?
Me, I guess.
All right.
I was gonna say I can, but I'll let Elliot go.
We'll go with Elliot.
Okay, so we've got our same categories. We've rated all the other books, so we can compare to those ones. I'll start with the category you put out for us, Trevor, of plot. I went full 10. I went full 10 on the plot here, and I kind of wrapped into this one a little bit of the pacing of the book, or the way the plot kind of played out, the way we experienced the plot, not just the actual plot itself. For me, it just worked. And I have a hard time explaining it. There were slow moments. There were parts where I didn't know where the story was going. And then there were parts that just really wrapped some things up in really satisfying ways that I haven't quite gotten from these Stormlight Archive books yet. Oathbringer had this, huge emotional high, adrenaline rush at the end of it. I didn't get that here in Rhythm of War, but it felt more cohesive. It felt very planned out. The book did. It felt like all the pieces were there for a reason. It felt like we touched on all of our characters except for one, which I'll talk about in my next category here, which I guess I'll jump to. Our next category is characters. I rated Rhythm of War 9 out of 10 because of what I was just kind of getting into. I thought our character development in this book was fantastic. Kaladin had some amazing moments in this book. Shallan had some amazing moments in this book. Some of the best moments of Shallan so far, I think. Adolin, fantastic moments. Navani, fantastic moments. I docked at a point because of Venli. I think Venli got a little bit run over by the bus
Yeah.
in this book. The parts of Venli that we got were good. They really were. There was some really good stuff. I liked the journey that she went on. I loved the closure we got at the end. It felt very wrapped up with that moment that she got with her mother at the end. So I felt the journey, I felt the growth. It just seemed very overshadowed by everything else. And with her being the focus, or the flashback point of view for this book, it felt a little bit harsh to her. So 9 out of 10 only on characters. World building, I I'm going to be surprised. And I shouldn't say this because then you'll record it and play it back to me later. I'll say it anyway. I'm going to be surprised if I ever rate a Brandon Sanderson book less than 10 on world building. His world building is second to none. And the more I get into the Cosmere, the more I firmly stand behind that 10. You can just go so deep. There are so many twists and turns and hidden little corners in this universe that he has fleshed out. It is genius the way he just kind of interlocks everything. I've never read an author who even comes close to this kind of world building. Theme, I gave it a 9. I gave it a 9 because I loved the plot themes that we saw for things like the mental health and the self-awareness and Vale, yes, actually, Shallan and Vale's interaction and kind of the little bit of resolution we got there. I kind of smushed into the theme, which I think was great. Navani's theme I thought was great, of kind of this self-doubt, but discovering how you, who's kind of overshadowed by these big macho warrior type heroes, can figure out how to contribute in this huge, massive world as just an engineer or a scholar. It was really good. Talked it a little bit because it wasn't quite as cohesive as some of the other books. I felt like, Way of Kings or Oathbringer, I finished the book thinking, boom, I know exactly what the theme of that book was. This one's a little more kind of all over the page, but we do get some really good themes amongst our characters, so still really high with a 9. Point of view. I've made fun of Paul in the past for using decimal points in his scores, but I'm gonna go back on that and use a decimal point myself. I'm gonna sneak in an 8.5 on point of view here. I'm still docking some points off of Brandon Sanderson for a little bit of his writing style. Not that it's poor by any means. He's still a brilliant writer in the way that he does it. It's just not quite 10 out of 10 for my taste. I wish that he would spend more time describing the scenery. I wish he would spend more time away from the action and more of the paint a mental picture for me of what I'm seeing. But that's not how he writes, so I'm not telling him to do it any differently. The way he does it works really well. It's just not quite my favorite. I added in that 0.5 actually because this book went a little bit more in that direction than the previous ones. I think this one, out of all 4, did more descriptive storytelling than the others. There were moments in this book where we got like a whole paragraph with no dialogue, or not like the narrator telling you what a character's doing. It was just description of this is what the characters are seeing. This is what your Thiru is, or there were just moments. I'm thinking specifically of when Kaladin is diving off the tower. That whole scene spans like 4 chapters, actually.
Yes.
Where he's like slow motion diving down the tower. There's so many fantastic descriptions of the windspren and how all that plays out. So I thought I added up a little bit, 8.5. If I've done my math right, I think that comes out to 46.5 out of 50 on our scoring scale here, which you ready for the shock? That is the second highest scoring out of these 4 books. And it's above Oathbringer.
I was going to say behind Way of Kings.
It's behind Way of Kings by half a point. They're really tightly clustered. I did 47 for Way of Kings, 46 for Oathbringer, and Rhythm of War is coming in second with a 46.5.
Nice. All right, Paul, your turn.
I was going to say I might split the difference if you want to go next, but I can definitely go now. I'll go ahead. Okay, so I think it's kind of funny because I think all of our answers to this were pretty different, and this might be the most polarizing on like topic to topic that we've had.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, first category of plot, Elliot had a 10. I had a 7. My 7 is because this is a very bittersweet rating for me because I think a lot of the things that happen, a lot of the things that we get to see in this book, like Adolin appearing to the Spren, like Undercourt meeting our heralds, stuff like that, like is super cool. But a lot of the way that it was logistically done felt like a drag. The exciting moments were super exciting, and I feel like there was a lot of dull moments. Um, and I'll get more into that also. That's the only reason why, spoiler alert, my world building is not a 10, is partly because of that as well. But in summary, I feel like a lot of our slow moments were really slow in this book, and so that's why I gave it a 7 for plot. Characters, I had 10. I had 10 out of 10. I like how I feel like the culmination of all of our characters in this story. I could probably take off a half point here or a point for Venley. I think I agree with Elliot, but I'm leaving it at a 10 because overall, I think it was a really good job of character development with a lot of our characters, with Navani, with Kaladin, with Shallan, with even Dalinar, with also, I think this may be the best development we've had for our villain characters.
Okay.
Which, less exciting, pretty fun to talk about, right? But Moash, before this book, we hate him, right?
Yeah.
But now, like, it's way worse. He's even more devious. Taravangian had some of the most complicated character development I've experienced in fiction, and I loved it. I loved it. Like, at least whether or not I actually like him as a character, I really like what was done with his story because it was so fascinating and twisty turny and stuff like that. So I put characters as a perfect 10. World building, I had a 9 out of 10. And that is that is not me comparing Brandon Sanderson to other authors. I think I agree that he's probably the best world builder that I have read, which I've consumed a good bit of fiction, but I'm not that crazy well read with other authors. But where I'm docking the point is compared to his other books that we've read. It feels like some stuff is handed to us, which is really nice, but it feels like literally handed to us. I'm thinking when we had our big, what was it called, music theory courses here in the middle of the book. As I was reading it, it almost felt kind of jarring. Of like he would talk about like numbers of scales, and then it was almost like a cut to like this is what a scale is, and this is what a tone is, and like things like that. And it makes sense so the reader can understand what's being talked about and what's happening. But it didn't feel as smooth. So that's why I'm taking a point off of world building. Moving forward to theme, I put the theme as a perfect 10 out of 10. And there are a lot of themes which I really liked. I feel like an overarching one is acceptance. You could look at Navani with the sibling. You could look at Shallan and her whole storyline, accepting like parts of herself. I feel like you could even look at Kaladin for sure with like accepting a new style of life and ways to contribute and ways to serve. There's a lot that goes into that. I love the themes that Hoyd sets in this story. With Kaladin, I love the theme that Adolin sets with the Spren. I thought those were amazing. My complaint, largely with this book, my largest complaints are like kind of pacing of this book, but the actual points, the culminations that it gets to, and the messages it sends across. I can agree with Elliot that I didn't know that there was one solid individual takeaway, like maybe you could say with The Way of Kings, but there are multiple in this, and I thought they were all stellar. Last one, I have my point of view as a 7. That is a good bit for Venley. This did not feel like Venley's book at all.
Okay.
I never felt like this was Venley's book. I never grew that attached to Venley. Like I like her more than I did before this book, I would say. But coming into this book, I was excited to kind of fall in love with another major character, and I don't think I really did. So that was a big part of it. I know I had more, and honestly, I'm kind of blanking the rest of my point of view rating. But a lot of it was with Venli. There's some parts that are just kind of jarring with how many point of views we have to cover. That actually doesn't take much away from me because I love having all of our characters involved in the story. But there is like an element that felt kind of jarring with our point of views. Oh, I think I remember why. Sorry, I'm backtracking a little bit. A reason why I'm taking off 3 points from point of view is a lot of our point of views. I feel like where there was cool character growth, I think it was lacking in like actual engagement. Like I'm thinking a lot of with Navani and Raboniel.
Okay.
Honestly, a lot of that it was pretty easy for me to like honestly gloss over and like mentally fast forward through it because it wasn't that engaging. We learned so much in this book about how the world works, but it didn't always feel super engaging from the point of view. So, anyways, so that totals up to me for a 43 out of 50.
All right. So a lot of what you were saying, Paul, I agree with, but for different reasons. So here's what I'll go into here. Plot. This is the lowest grade I've ever given a Stormlight book. Plot 6 out of 10. And here's why. The plot somewhat falls flat for me in this book because all of these storylines are so broken apart. And I do think, I almost said Dalinar. I do think Brandon Sanderson does a good job of keeping them relevant with each other, even if like the characters don't know it at the time. You're reading, a Dalinar and then a Kaladin. You're reading Shallan and Navani at the same time, and they're struggling with a couple of the same things. And so, as a reader, it seems fairly cohesive, but not. It's not quite the united against the forces of evils that Oathbringer feels like to me. That we're going to it's split into two for Oathbringer. There's the Tower, and then there's Kholinar. Here we're split into what, 4, 5 maybe, even if we're counting Venli. So we have all of our different heroes kind of split, and it's fairly frustrating to me because I think a lot of where Brandon Sanderson shines is dialogue. I think his dialogue is the best in fantasy, period. I really, really, really like Kaladin talking to Dalinar in part 1 of the book. And then they leave, they split up, and they don't talk to each other for the rest of the book. That, I understand that's where the plot has to go, especially for a middle book. I'll talk about this later. But this book feels more like a middle book than any other book in the Stormlight Archive, to me. I think it struggles with a lot of the middle book syndrome that is in quotes there, because it's a common fault of the middle of the story. It doesn't have quite the same fulfilling character arcs. Even Oathbringer absolutely does not have that. And it's kind of interesting to think, well, in my opinion at least. There are plenty of people who disagree with me. Oathbringer doesn't have middle book syndrome near as much as Rhythm of War does for me. But I'll get back to that here in a second. Characters is a 9, and you guys were either did or were tempted to dock a point for Venli. I am fine with Venli. I really enjoy Venli. I enjoy her character arc in this book. I docked it for Dalinar. I don't think Dalinar changed from page 1 to page 1100 and whatever in this book. At the beginning of the book, he's like, I need to discover some more about my powers. And then at the end of the book, he's still thinking that. That's where... Eliot, do you remember in Oathbringer you said that you felt the Kaladin story was a little dropped?
Yep.
It's the same thing here for me, except it's with Dalinar. I don't feel like Dalinar moves at all, maybe I could say. World building is a 10 for all the same reasons you guys were talking about. Paul, you gave it a 9, and while you were talking about this, it made me think, and this goes back to the plot. You gave a point to plot that I didn't, and took a point away from world building that I didn't. So, and I think if you combine those two, we are pretty similar here, because there's almost too much in this book. In fact, I would go as far to say there is too much. He is explaining.
Not possible.
There's
it is very possible.
He's explaining 4 different dynamics to you in one book. Maybe you could even say in one part. Part 3 and part 4, he is sitting you down in a cell, you can't move, and saying, "All right, this is how the magic system works." We've kind of done vague references to it. You've done guesswork up until now. I'm sitting you down. This is how it works, which is great. I completely understand the need for that. Again, middle book syndrome. I need to know the stakes. I need to know the rules going into book 5. I get that. That is totally. I'm not saying that's a bad way to do it. I am saying it is a necessary evil, and Rhythm of War suffers for it. Still 10, but I docked a point on the plot because I felt the plot drags because of world building is a 10, if that makes sense. Theme.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Theme is an 8. I love all of the themes that Brandon Sanderson is communicating in this book. He does a very good job of them. He does a great job of feeling like each individual character is on their own journey, on their own theme, while still tying them together within the book theme. I think he's one character, one plot strand, I should say. That's not quite how I want to say that. One plot strand too far in this book. There's a little bit too much going on. Takes away from Venli, takes away from Kaladin, takes away from Shallan. Shallan has some of the best moments in the Stormlight Archive in this book. It doesn't feel as impactful because it's not in Words of Radiance. It's in Rhythm of War. Does that make sense? There's a little bit too much going on for me.
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
I have a question for you related to that, but I'll let you kind of round out your scores here before I ask it.
Yeah,
okay.
Likewise.
And then same thing with point of view. I'm kind of tying those two together. The theme and the point of view is great. It's just, I think there's too many balls being juggled in the air, and a couple of them are dropped. I appreciate what is trying to be aimed at in this book, and I think he does hit the target. He doesn't hit the bullseye. Whereas The Way of Kings, Oathbringer, those two books hit the bullseye for me. That puts me at a 41 out of 50, which I'm fairly certain puts this below Words of Radiance for me as far as numbers go. That is not how I would rate it directly compared to Words of Radiance, but that's the number I came to today. I would probably rate it above Words of Radiance. Similar critique for both of the books. There are some of the best action movie sequences in both books. The overall book as a whole doesn't quite press all the buttons for me, if that makes sense. 41 out of 50.
So my question for you, you made a lot of comments in there that I think are definitely fair, and I follow your logic train, especially with the kind of multiple plot strings all going on at the same time, sometimes in different directions, and making it perhaps a little hard to follow. What were your thoughts this time around versus the first time you read this? Specifically, I'm thinking of the first time you read this was incredibly quickly.
Absolutely.
Which I'm sure a lot of people consume these books in that manner, where you're very excited about it. Yes, it is a colossally huge book, but you're going to sit down and you're going to pound it out in a weekend or the course of a week. Whereas on this podcast, we did it much, much slower than that over the course of more like 6 months. Did your takes specifically on the kind of juggling multiple storylines, how did that change when you were consuming it really fast versus really slow?
It's a great question. The highs of Rhythm of War hit harder for me on the second. I liked the book more on my second read. I'll lead with that. The highs certainly had higher impact for me because of the slower moments dragged a little bit more for me. When you're binging a book,
Yep.
especially when you're learning about the magic systems for the first time, I didn't mind that. I was like, oh, that's really cool to theorize about, and like that's good information. I can go from that. I already knew that this time around. So this time, those parts are dragging a little bit harder for me. But then the payoff, moments and
Yeah.
Tef dying, and all that, all those payoff moments are higher for me, if that makes sense.
I'm wondering if this is a book that might go over a little bit better on a slower, more studious read. That those parts where you've got a lot of different plot points going on, I wonder if you're taking it a little bit slower and taking time to just kind of focus on the plot point that you're on, as opposed to going really fast and not really caring about what Navani and Raboniel are fighting over, when you really just want to get back to Adolin, or you just want to get back to Kaladin, or whatever's going on. I wonder if going slower might fit this book a little better than some of the other ones. But that was just a thought. I'd have to go read it fast to see.
Yeah, I actually want to chime in. So whenever I initially thought about the plot, I put a 5. And that was because I think the points that we get to, the destination, if you will, is way better than the journey in this book, to use those terms.
Blasphemy.
I think that, yeah, I know. That's so backwards. I know, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
The moments that we get to, the pinnacle points, are definitely, whenever we were there, I was contemplating saying this is like hands down my favorite book, and it might be. It depends if we're talking about the high points or if we're like reading through the whole book, because where the high points were so good, I feel like the book was so slow. Like it is really cool. Like it was good to learn about the magic system. We learned so much about fabrials, and honestly, like the whole time we were learning about fabrials, I was like, I don't this is personal opinion. I was like, I don't care that much about the fabrials and how they work. I don't care that much about like all that stuff. And so, and that, since we were going at such a slow pace, it would be like a month of
Learning about fabrials.
fabrials, and I love the music theory
Yep.
stuff. Like it was super fascinating. It was fun to theorize about, but it didn't feel entirely necessary to me, and it felt like a long time of kind of a drag and stuff. And so that was why I thought plot of like the points we get to, excellent, 10 out of 10. The how long it takes to get there, also, I feel like if you zoom out and kind of look at this, what kind of our narrative that happens almost in a vacuum of like, we're at Urithiru is under attack, and that's kind of like, I feel like I lost magnitude, and it took way too long for that to like be resolved and for things to happen. I was like, it's been like, it feels like it's been a year. Shouldn't they all be dead by now? Or like,
Right.
like,
So
how are people still just hanging out? And it was hard to follow. And also, I was kind of hoping that Urithiru would be like half of our book story, if you will. I didn't feel like it deserved that conflict. I didn't feel like that deserved to be the entirety of our book's conflict.
So here's a question I have for you. I agree with most of what you said, Paul. To alleviate, we're talking about part 3 and how part 3 drags. It might be the beginning of part 4 as well, I think.
And I think some of part 2 also. If I remember correctly, part 2 was pretty slow.
The tower,
in my head, that's where all the fabrials were. But
yeah, the tower falls at the end of part 2. And so to alleviate the drag, it's supposed to be Kaladin zipping around the tower, defending nodes and, fighting Leshwi and stuff, which does happen, but it doesn't do its job for me. Like I'm the biggest Kaladin fan on the planet, and these action sequences with Kaladin are not working for me. I mean, they're
I
fine,
agree.
but I don't know why. I don't know what it is about them that it's not like, a Parshendi bridge run. Those like are really fun for me in the Way of Kings, or the duels, or stuff like that. I don't know what it is about zipping around the tower with this Iron Man gauntlet defending nodes that doesn't quite do it for me.
Yeah, I agree. I fully agree. I can't entirely put my finger on why it didn't appeal to me or excite me, but it didn't really. And I don't fully know if, like, I think if you literally replaced it with the they could surge bind and this was more of just a head-on-head surge binder fight, it would have been way better. But
Okay.
it felt like if you're playing a video game and you have to get from point A to point B, but like between point A and point B, they like throw in all these like things that set you way back. That's how it felt to me, and it was like it felt more like an annoyance of like hindering all of our characters rather than like a good storyline point.
Everything you guys are saying makes sense. I too felt a bit of boredom in some of those Kaladin moments. I wonder if it was just the repetition of them. Of, oh, here we go. He's gonna go fight another node and get beat up by the pursuer and Raboniel.
Yeah.
But I think if you took those away, the final showdown with Kaladin and the pursuer would not have been nearly as impactful. Where
Absolutely.
there's a fantastic moment where Kaladin stands up to the pursuer and finally says, "I've taken away your greatest weapon because I'm no longer afraid of you." And that line, that one liner means more because you've been through all the slog of Kaladin fighting against the pursuer when he is afraid of him and thinks he's going to lose, but he's doing it anyway. It all kind of the payoff is all in that one little scene, which for me made it worth it, but perhaps just barely. It was a slog to get to that one scene, but I think if you were to take those away or do something different, you'd also have to do something different with that final scene because you need that build up to get that payoff.
I agree completely. That was kind of my thoughts of I think this had the best moments to like capitalize at the end and sign things off. It just really felt like a slog getting to that point. But yeah, I agree. And that's why at times I literally thought about, is this my favorite book in the series? Because those moments were so good.
And that is a lot of people's critique of the Way of Kings, especially like casual Stormlight reader. Like if you pick up the Way of Kings for the first time, that is what a lot of people bounce off of the Way of Kings for, is because we're on another bridge run. Like, why are we on another bridge run? Just we know you're gonna escape the bridge crew. Just do it already. Like that's a lot of why people bounce off of the Way of Kings. But that is why I love the Way of Kings, is because it takes them so long to get through all of that, and they're on that journey together as bridgemen, and they're losing people. Like it's intense for me, and I don't know why. I never I well I've probably feared for Kaladin's life once in this book. That at no point, and I think him losing his surge binding is supposed to raise the tension, but for whatever reason that doesn't happen for me.
Yeah, I feel like as the reader, it wouldn't feel right at all for him to like, oh, his surge, like for him to die without like a full surge binder fight climax, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it like raised the stakes. It like lowered the stakes by raising the stakes, if you will, is how it felt.
I felt there was more higher stakes or maybe just higher tension in the Kaladin and Lirin scenes,
Yeah.
not the Kaladin pursuer scenes.
I
I'm
think
with you.
I think the Kaladin and Lirin scenes are some of the best drama, best insert word here, that we've had in Stormlight.
Yep. Because we're talking about, the Kaladin storyline maybe stalling a little bit or maybe being a little bit tedious in places. And I think it was at a few times. But overall, especially when I compare it back to Oathbringer, overall, I think the Kaladin plotline in this book is fantastic.
Right.
The dialogue, the conflict that we get between Kaladin and Lyra from chapter 1. I was going back through my notes thinking, oh, at some point early on in this book, they really get into it on the whole surgeon versus soldier. That's chapter 1.
Yep.
They get into that. And so to set the tone with that and then wrap it up with the epic chapter where Kaladin speaks his fourth oath and saves his father, and his father acknowledges the worth that Kaladin has and the hope that he's inspired in others. Like, what a cool storyline.
Now that you brought that up, I do want to talk about that. What did you guys think of part 1 of this book? Because part 1 of this book seems fairly isolated, fairly different than the rest of the book. I view part 1 and part 5 of Rhythm of War very differently than the middle parts. I really that this book kicks off with a really intense full 10 chapter action sequence of rescuing Hearthstone, running from the Fused, battling the Fused in the air. Like, what did you guys think of part 1 of the book?
I did love part 1. In my head, like the bookends of this book were excellent. Part 1 did so much for me in that's the most we see Moash come, right? And he just like torments Kaladin, like in
Yep.
front of his face, does like the most devious things you can. That's why I'm saying the villain character building was really good. I was referencing that for Moash's story at least. And then it felt like kind of a big lull until we got to like part 5, I guess. But I think part 1 was excellent, and I think part 5 was groundbreakingly excellent, like phenomenal.
Now, all of this being said, personally for me, if Stormlight was split into 4 movies, which is a terrible idea, but if Stormlight was split into 4 movies, this would be the best movie. I think Rhythm of War would make for the best action sequences, would make for the best on-screen dialogue. If it was condensed down into a 2.5-hour classic blockbuster film, I think Rhythm of War would be the best one.
Not to derail us too far since we're supposed to be talking about Rhythm of War, but I feel like we maybe even talked about this like in that walking through the airport or something like that. I think Words of Radiance is my least favorite of these books, but would make the best movie.
Yep.
There's a very linear build-up in that book, which would make the most sense in a movie. This book, Rhythm of War, you'd have to do some weird things because you've got so many different settings and plot lines going on.
Yeah.
It could work.
It would need precursor movies. I still stand by my view of if these were put on screen, I do think you make Words of Radiance the first movie in the series.
I forgot about that.
You start with that because it's very linear. It makes a lot of sense. Characters, as they're introduced in Words of Radiance, would still make sense if you hadn't read it, I think. You tweak a couple things, and then you could go back. The next one is actually the prequel, Words, The Way of Kings, and I think you could do Oathbringer, Rhythm of War, and I think it would work great, in that kind of way. But yeah, I see what you mean though. Like, there's a lot of really hype buildup. I think the one thing, if we're really being picking about movie stuff, is at the start we see the villain of Moash, but at the end it's not resolved with Kaladin. If that was like resolved with Kaladin, then yeah, it would be an excellent standalone movie in my opinion. Like probably the best in the series. But man, but Words of Radiance would also be excellent. I always think of the scene between Kaladin and Zeth over the high storm. Like that would be one of the coolest scenes in film ever. Like it would be so sick.
All right. Favorite character from this book specifically?
I said that Adolin was my favorite from this book. I think what he does in Shadesmore and with the Spren, with Kalak, like his dialogue, we're seeing him step and almost becoming like the new Dalinar, right? He is Dalinar's son, but what we know of Adolin's character thus far is not similar to Dalinar. He's kind of the like almost like snotty nosed brat, um, who's more like pompous, cares about his appearance and things like that, more material than Dalinar, who's very like rigid code of honor. We're starting to see Adolin show up in a really big way, like I don't know what you call it, ethically, like in his code of honor, his like personal the way he conducts himself. We've seen a lot of fruit pay off with his just general care for his shard blade, Maya, which is just like a plus. It's like a little side plus. But the way he stands up and argues on behalf of the Knights Radiant was one of my favorite parts of the book,
Yeah.
for sure. And definitely a lot of like character growth. Of I can't imagine first book Adolin like doing anything like this.
Yeah.
And so it just a huge step from we kind of had our biggest fighting characters. It felt like in previous books, Kaladin and like Adolin and Words of Radiance become more diplomatic and counseling characters, and I think it worked really well. I think it worked excellent, specifically for Adolin as well. I think it worked super good.
Paul, I'm curious what you choose for Stormlight 5, because for the Way of Kings, you chose Zeth. And then for this book, you chose Adolin, which, as far as like page count goes or time on screen, those are fairly like C level. Like, I'm not saying like they're bad characters, but as far as like page count goes, they don't get that much in those books that you're picking them on. So it's interesting to me that you're picking Adolin when he does not have that much page time in this book.
That's a really good point. I have done that in probably all of our books because I probably said Zeth for all the other books thus far. Um, so Zeth always gave me a hope of the really excellent screen time. We have more screen time from Zeth in this book, and he's probably like I've been on the fence about this. I don't know if I can fully say he's my favorite character overall right now, but I think that will change in book 5. I think book 5 will solidify him as my favorite. That's my prediction. It's really like the other characters are too hard for me to resist. Like Kaladin has a lot of screen time. In this book, Navani has a lot of screen time. I think the times that I saw the character per how engaged I was is kind of how I'm viewing that. Whenever Zeth was mentioned in the first books, oh, I was so zoomed in. I was captivated. Adolin in this book, whenever he is on the screen, if you will, on the page, he is doing great things throughout. Like such a high screen time per quality average.
Right.
Whereas like Navani was awesome in this book. She grew like there's a lot of development. Her really stepping into a bigger role, standing up for a lot of good things. But like my engagement per time that she was on the screen was not that high. She did good things, but like it wasn't like action packed, if you will. Maybe that's like the root of my ratings is kind of action packed, like value per word, if you will.
Right.
Now that you've thrown Navani under the bus, I'm gonna go pick her up and dust her off.
I'm sorry.
Because it's okay. I follow it. I follow what you were saying, but Navani was my favorite actually for this book for a couple of reasons. One was just the chance to get to know her better because before she was at least C tier as far as screen time.
Right.
Again, you know, she was very much just kind of on the side. I think we even talked about this. We didn't know quite what to think of her coming out of Oathbringer. It was like, okay, well, there's Navani. We
But
don't quite know.
I mean, before Rhythm of War, I wouldn't be surprised if she had less than 5 point of view segments in Words of Radiance and Oathbringer.
Yeah, something pretty small like that. Our engagement with her is very small, but then here it was full on. Is this Fenley's book or is it Navani's book? Like we
Yes.
spent a lot of time in Navani's head, which I thought was a good thing. I really enjoyed getting to examine her character a little bit more, and I was very pleasantly surprised by the journey that she did go on. And maybe it's just the fact that I'm an engineer and I relate a lot with her, but the the development that we got from her, I thought was fantastic. To start this book out with seeing her get very much shoved aside by Gavilar, very much just kind of, oh, you're useless. Maybe not quite that strongly, but very much this, are you really a player on the big scale in this story? And then we see her climb her way up the self-confidence ladder of figuring out what she is capable of and figuring out that she can make a difference even though she's not a warrior, even though she's not a soldier. I think all the rest of our main characters, Shallan included in a lot of ways, are very war oriented. They're soldiers, they
Yeah.
are fighters, they are protectors. Shallan is a spy. What is Navani? That was kind of her journey in this was, who am I? How do I contribute? And she figured out, she literally figured it out as she was going through this and solved the puzzles and did the mental fencing with Roboniel throughout the whole thing. And it had such a fantastic payoff at the end where she becomes a freaking bondsmith.
Yeah.
Who had that prediction from end of last book? Not me. I would be willing to bet not anyone. Like that was a twist. We kind of maybe got a sense it was coming as we were going, but if you had thrown me that at the beginning of the book, I'd have been like, nah, no way, not even on the list. So that I really enjoyed the journey and it was super cool. Navani's now probably top 5 of characters for me and definitely my favorite in this one.
Nice.
What about you, Trevor?
Mine is probably Teft with a honorable mention for Syl. And both of those have to do with the Kaladin storyline, which I do really appreciate in this book. But I don't think Kaladin carries his own storyline in this book. I think he is a engine to have the audience be spoken to by Brandon, which is not a bad thing. It is part of Kaladin's character to be coached and helped along even when he doesn't feel he needs it, which is the most important time, where people can come alongside him and tell him it is okay to be struggling with what you're struggling with. Syl included, Dalinar included, Adolin, Teft, all of those people speaking into Kaladin, not just in this book, but up until this point, is really important for Kaladin to be able to get to where he gets to in this book. And I do think Kaladin will shine in book 5 because of all of this investment from other people. But because we definitely will not get any more from Teft, I do think Teft is my favorite character in this book because of what he stamps onto Kaladin's life. So I would say Teft with a Syl honorable mention. I just don't think it's Syl quite yet. It has a high possibility to be Syl in the future because the potential of really inspirational character is definitely there for Syl, but not quite yet.
One thing I want to throw in right quick before we move on. I think Navani is my most improved favorite character.
Yep, I would agree
moved
with
up
that.
the most points on my list. Adolin was already among my very, very favorites starting this book, and he really sealed it home with his parts. But Navani was great. I was thrilled whenever she became another bondsmith, which is saying a lot for maybe even the start of this book. I don't know if I would have wanted that, but yeah. Anyways, throwing that out there.
I think Adolin is my most improved because Adolin's not very high on the list for me before this book. Navani's higher on the list than I think she was for you, Paul, starting Rhythm of War. So Navani's certainly improved based on her page count, but Adolin I think is most improved for me.
If we're going with the most improved theme, I might throw Venli out there too as most improved, but that's not saying a whole lot because she goes from like 48th on the list to like 18th,
25th, right?
Yeah, 20th.
Yeah. She's not top 10 yet, even still, but she went from who is that to okay, I appreciate your story and you definitely had some cool moments.
Yeah, let's dissect that a little further. This is Venli's book as far as like quotes go. If you're talking about the Way of Kings and who has the flashback perspectives, it's Kaladin, Shallan, Dalinar. All those three are fairly obvious who we're focused on to character develop. Like, not to say the other characters don't get development, but that is their book. That's we're dissecting their plot. When I recorded the Rhythm of War special episode that we did, by the way, this will go live 2 years to the day that that episode went live. Anyway,
that's pretty cool.
When we recorded that episode, I
just realized we can go watch that now.
Yes, you can.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go watch that.
Exactly.
I was watching briefly earlier today, but I made the claim this is Navani's book. I'm not sure I still believe that. I actually do think Venli shines brighter in this book than Navani does. Wow. But it is a couple percent points. Like, why does Navani get, I would even go as far to say, definitely more present day page count than Venli does. If you combine flashbacks and present day, Venli probably still gets more. But why does Navani get such a huge spotlight if this is Venli's book?
I have a suspicion that we've joked before about our characters getting their huge breakthroughs the book after. And I kind of have a sneaking suspicion that we might have a real big breakthrough with Venli in book 5 compared to this. I would agree. I with you saying this is Navani's book. I think this is Navani's book. Like, we start with her in the prologue. We get even like, it felt like a very linear story development from that point to what we see Navani at now. She ends the book by bonding the sibling, which is a really big deal and a really huge climax, and like the huge reveal, huge development that she like worked to be accepted by the sibling, and so much stuff went into it. She found anti-void light. She like put in so much legwork for our story, for our heroes, that like it's just her book. I can't. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. It felt like Navani's book. It did not feel like Venli's in comparison.
I think I might have a guess on why Brandon did it the way he did. And this is going to start to bridge over into my predictions for Stormlight 5. I think in Stormlight 5, we are going to spend a significant amount of time diving into the unmade and the nature of the fused and the singers even more than we have before. I think we're going to get into like the nature of Roshar as a planet. And I think Baedo Mishram is going to play a lot into that. I think the singers are going to play into a lot of that as natives of this planet. And so I think Brandon wanted us to have the pause and give you insight into the singers and help you relate to them a little bit more before we could get into that in 5. And so I think that's why book 4 was always going to be a singer point of view. Maybe perhaps Eshonai, or I'm not quite sure how all that went down of when he like switched over to Venli, or however that happened in his planning. I think that he always needed that to happen. But I think the Navani storyline made more sense with the plot he was running with. And so he needed the tower to be kind of the focal point of this book. And Navani was the big player in that. And so it feels more like Navani's book. I completely agree. But he kept all of the Venli stuff in there, flashbacks and all of that, because I think that is going to be set up for the next book. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if Venli herself doesn't actually play a large part in Stormlight 5.
That's what I was going to chime in. Here's one of my predictions for Stormlight 5. I don't think Venli is in book 5. I would say at all. I could go as far to say that I don't think Venli is in book 5 at all. I think the singers are gone. I think they are
the listeners.
I'm sorry. Yes, I think the listeners are gone. I think they will come back for the back 5. But I think as far as our contest of champions are leaving Roshar to go, however we leave Roshar at the end of book 5, I think the listeners are done. I think they are establishing their own nation again. They're doing whatever, they're petting their chasm fiends or whatever's happening over there. But I don't think they're coming back that quickly to become allies, enemies, frenemies, whatever for book 5.
I'm completely on board with that, with one little caveat. If we do somehow get like a battle for Roshar at the end of the book, I could see them like showing up,
right,
participating, taking a side.
The caveat I have is Leshwi. Leshwi is not included in that. Leshwi is coming back for book 5, maybe even dies in book 5. Leshwi will be back. The listeners will not be.
I think, tied into all of this, as we start to branch out beyond the planet that we've been on this entire time, as we start to maybe poke our toes into the wider cosmos. When I say we, I mean like the characters in this story. I think we're going to revisit the whole who has the right to this planet question. We're going to get back to the whole, is it humans or is it singers who belong on this planet? And I think we needed to feel some sympathy for the singers in order for that to be a dilemma for us in 5. And I think the Venli storyline, the flashbacks there, to watch like ancient culture singer listeners specifically interact with the humans, kind of get their innocence shattered a little bit by, oh my gosh, the world is so much bigger than we thought. Oh man, we just got corrupted by Voidspren. Oh dang, we just summoned the Everstorm. Like all this stuff that kind of just happens to them. I think we're supposed to feel some sympathy for them for all of that, and that's going to be important later. It's conditioning us as readers for what we're going to have to try and experience in 5.